when on the play, Tian's deck can win before Nicastri does anything.
And Tian's sideboard actually is a full conversion into a Charbelcher strategy because it assumes his graveyard is not going to be valid game 2 and 3. So we'll get to see if he goes to that as well.
You have to imagine you will. Deathblade is a deck that can hate the graveyard. But it's interesting, right? When you play a deck like all spells, you can do things like that with your sideboard because there really just isn't that much you can board into.
Right.
You don't have lands.
When you don't have access to lands, it sort of limits the kind of strategies you can incorporate.
All right, well, Nicastri gets to be on the play here. That'll be pretty good for him. Starts with a Marsh Flats into an Underground Sea. We'll see if he gets to pull off that critical Thoughtseize here. Be a huge boon for him if he gets to Thoughtseize on the play. It's a card that's very good, but only when Nicastri is going first.
Exactly. But if he has something like Deathrite Shaman here, yeah, that's powerful if the game goes on for a couple turns, but it might not.
Yeah, and you're right, it is Deathrite Shaman. So no interaction here on turn 1. We'll see just how good Tian's draw is here. And it looks like he has some Chrome Moxes and a Cabal Ritual and a Spirit Guide. So he's going to have enough mana to, if he has the Balustrade Spy to ramp into, he should have enough to make it this turn.
Yep. This will be great, you know? We're talking about Legacy being an extreme format. You know, you're getting new to it. There's a lot to see.
Sure is an extreme
we might kick off with a turn 1 kill.
All right, Chrome Mox. And John asked, the one thing that he has to do is decide how to sequence here.
It's always the complexity with these decks is, you know, you have no margin for error because you can, generally speaking, only generate exactly enough mana. And so if you order your spells wrong, you get dazed when you shouldn't have. Maybe you could have played around Spell Pierce by timing things differently, all that kind of stuff. It really matters.
So the first one's going to go ahead and exile Bridge from Below, so that Mox makes black mana. Second Mox is going to exile Manamorphose, so that one makes red or green. At this point, if I'm Tian, I'm suspecting that Nicastri just has nothing.
Well, he doesn't have a lot of wiggle room to play around things. It's the nature of his deck. You cannot really play around Force of Will with this kind of strategy. You just have to cast your stuff.
You can maybe play around Daze, but Deathblade typically doesn't play Daze. So Manamorphose will be cast here. That's a card, it's going to change 2 mana into mana of any 2 colors and then replaces itself. So it doesn't really matter what colors Tian makes those, they're all going to become black here. Cabal Ritual will bring him up to 3 mana, now all of it black. He had to sequence it in that order if he wanted the card off Manamorphose, because once he made all black mana, he wouldn't be able to cast the Manamorphose anymore.
Exactly.
So 3 black right now. That die there is the Storm Count. That probably won't come into play. But you see Undercity Informer. This is one of the enablers for the deck. So Tian's going to spend 3 mana making that.
If you drafted a lot of Gatecrash, you probably have many of these in your trash can somewhere. But this is a powerful enabler for Legacy decks.
He's just another Balustrade Spy. So he is a 3 mana 2/3. For 1 mana, he'll sacrifice himself to mill to a creature. And that Spirit Guide that Tian drew this turn, that's going to activate the Undercity Informer.
Yep. And away we go.
All right, so turn 1, he does get to mill himself until he hits a land. And as he and probably Nicastri knows, there are no lands in his deck, so he's going to flip his library over here.
This is going to result in all the Narcomoebas in his deck coming into play as well.
Yeah, so Narcomoeba, this is a 3 of in his deck, 3 being a pretty key number here.
Yeah, 3 is the exact number that he needs to dread return something into play.
Yep, so he should flip his whole deck. He'll find 3 of them. Now, sometimes in these lists, you see a copy of Azami, Lady of Scrolls, so that when they reanimate the Laboratory Maniac, they can then also dread return Azami and immediately draw a card. Tian's not doing that. I believe he's going to have to pass the turn after making his Laboratory Maniac.
Because when you mill over, you're also milling over Bridge from Below. So when you sack the Narcomoebas, that generates replacement zombies, which then can be sacked to a second dread return. Exactly. So you can get Laboratory Maniac and Azami back in the same turn. Right,
there is only 1 dread return in Tian's list. And that's the only spell he can cast out of the yard here. So here's 3 Narcomoebas. He's going to start out by therapying away any possible answers Nicastri could have. So Nicastri's just going to have to top deck a Swords to Plowshares for this Laboratory Maniac.
Yeah. And Yuan's setting aside the cards that matter here. He has Cabal Therapies. Now, these Cabal Therapies are basically free to cast because of the bridge from below in the graveyard. It results in the Narcomoeba getting replaced by a zombie.
Right. There are 2 bridge from belows in his deck. 1 was exiled to that Chromox. So there's still 1 left in the graveyard, so he will get a zombie when he goes to sacrifice this. But just 1 zombie. As he sees here, the coast was clear. This is exactly the kind of hand you mentioned where in a regular matchup, this hand is acceptable, but here it's not really going to do much.
It's a very powerful opening. I mean, this has access to a turn 3 Batter Skull alongside Deathrite Shaman's mana ramping and utility. But this is the nature of Legacy. It can be asymmetrical warfare, and a hand that looks fine sometimes is worth nothing because your opponent's off on their own planet doing something entirely different, which is what you see right now.
Here's the combo then. Dread Return. You can flash it back by sacrificing 3 creatures. Tian's board will be sacrificed here. It's going to target, I have to think, is Laboratory Maniac. This is the rare from Innistrad. It's going to get Underworld Cerberus. Okay, no, I see where this is going. This is actually really interesting. Okay, so he's going to use Underworld Cerberus. He's going to sacrifice Underworld Cerberus to a Cabal Therapy. When he dies, he's going to get all his creatures from his graveyard back into his hand, which includes a whole boatload of Spirit Guides, which he can then use to, I imagine, just simply cast these spells. Now, I'm not sure yet. I'm sure he'll show us where he's going to get the blue mana from then to cast Laboratory Maniac.
He has a Wild Cantor.
Okay, so Wild Cantor will go ahead and do that. So 2 zombies here. So Underworld Cerberus. It's just really a combo piece just for that ability that when he dies, he gets to get all his creatures back.
Yeah.
And he knows that Nicastri has no answers right now. Cabal Therapy took care of that.
But Tian still needs to either win the game this turn or get his Laboratory Maniac into play. Because keep in mind, he has no library. So what he has right now is not sufficient for him to win the game. There needs to be another step of this process.
Yeah, he could still deck here. He has to make sure that when he draws a card next turn, there's a Laboratory Maniac in play.
And that's actually how he assembles the kill in 1 turn. He can now sacrifice the Underworld Cerberus, get all of his stuff back, which includes the mana with which to cast Laboratory Maniac, a Laboratory Maniac, and a Street Wraith. The Street Wraith he can then cycle. That triggers a draw while he has no library. Laboratory Maniac goes off. That's the kill.
So he's going to go for a turn. This is going to be a turn 1 kill. He's not going to have to dodge that Swords to Plowshares if everything works out right here.
Exactly.
That's kind of an elegant way to be doing things. It utilizes the Street Wraith in the deck.
Because the Street Wraith is also just, you know, this deck wants to kind of play a 56-card, 52-card game because it's all about finding the right cards on turn 1.
Yeah. What I like about this, as opposed to like using something like Azami, is that it kind of dodges pinpoint removal. So say Tian gets to resolve Laboratory Maniac, he can immediately cycle a Street Wraith. If an opponent tries to kill the Laboratory Maniac in response, he'll cycle another Street Wraith. And so his opponent would need 4 kill spells that turn because he would just continue to cycle more Street Wraiths in response to any removal for the Maniac. So that's actually a better way of a very robust way of protecting the Laboratory Maniac.
Yeah.
He's going to go ahead and sack the Cerberus. This is to Cabal Therapy. Going to pick up all the creatures.
Yep.
From his. That's a whole 26 of them. Well, 25 now. You got rid of the Cerberus. So we're going to get to start the GP here. It looks like with a turn 1 kill on Tian's side, which, while a few decks are capable of turn 1 kills, they're pretty rare, I would say, in Legacy.
Yeah, this is one of the decks that, alongside Charbelcher, that does it the most reliably. Now, reliable is still not a huge percentage of the time, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong here, but Aaron had none of the appropriate defense, and now it looks like Juan's going to start off with a turn 1 kill.
Yeah, so see here, he's going to get back a stack of creatures to run through one more time what's happening here. Underworld Cerberus was sacrificed. He has a triggered ability where Tian gets to get all the creatures out of his graveyard and put them in his hand. He's going to pitch Spirit Guides. These are the Simian and Elvish Spirit Guides to make mana. He's going to use a green or red mana to cast Wild Cantor. Wild Cantor will sacrifice to make a blue. He'll then cast Laboratory Maniac and then cycle some Street Wraiths to draw the last card in his deck, which isn't there, so he will win the game. Wild Canter actually being a pretty key piece to the puzzle here, as you know, there is no Merfolk Spirit Guider as something that pitches for blue mana.
Yep.
But Cantor helps to solve that.
That's why there's only one copy in the list. It's not something that he's looking to draw in his opening hand because it doesn't generate mana on turn 1. It costs a mana, you sacrifice it for a mana. But it is a piece of the puzzle once this happens.
Exactly. See there? He's showing Nicastri the cards here. Nicastri's got, you know, he I would think, knows what's going on here, that he's dead. He probably wants to see it played out.
Yeah.
So that he'll know better what to do in the post-board games. So we see a red, a green, a second green.
No one is going to flip over their entire library on the first turn of the game and not kill you. So.
Yeah. Here's Wild Cantor. It's going to make a blue mana. So now he has... Yep, and Nicastri is going to go ahead and concede to that. So game 1 goes to Yuan Tian. Game lasting a mere 2 turns. 1 for Nicastri and 1 for Yuan.
And you can see, again, why this is a format where things like Siege Rhino don't really play. Because this can happen to you.
And like I said, this is one of the scary parts about playing against a deck like Oops All Spells, is that they can win on turn 1. They don't always do it, and as you saw there, all it would have taken was 1 Force of Will or 1 Thought. Well, actually, that hand was Thoughtseized Proof, but it would have taken a Force of Will on Nicastri's side, and that would have, to Force of Will that Undercity Informer, that probably would have been the game.
Yeah. Well, he would have had some hope of reassembling there because he has 2 copies of Chromox in play, but it's very unlikely Tian can win that game if he's hit with Force of Will, but Aaron did not have it, and instead, Yuan gets to win on the first turn of the game.
So going to sideboards, we first talked about Yuan Tian, how he'll probably be changing into the Goblin Charbelcher strategy. He has a 15-card sideboard where he can switch over to that. He would want to do that if he suspects graveyard hate, which will most likely happen here.
So the sideboard here is 4 Goblin Charbelcher, 4 Lion's Eye Diamond, 4 Red Flame, 2 Land Grant, and a Stomping Ground. Now, this is to sideboard into the Charbelcher package to get away from the graveyard because there's so many powerful anti-graveyard cards. Cards like Tormod's Crypt, Leyline of the Void, that this deck cannot beat. I really like the Stomping Ground in the deck. Traditionally in Legacy, you see people play a Taiga, but the Stomping Ground has picked up in popularity because it's just a declaration of this doesn't matter. I don't care if I take 2 points of damage. I'm trying to kill you on the first turn. I'd rather save the $70 and just grab a Stomping Ground that I have left over from my Gate Crash packs. I'm a big fan. On Aaron's side, his sideboard a lot more conventional, and this is very typical of decks that you see in Legacy, these style of decks where you have a lot of moving parts game 1, some creature removal, some counter spells. They're not going to be good in every matchup, and the sideboards are going to be a lot of 1s and 2-ofs to be able to improve matchups across the board. So you can cut out your 4 or 5 least efficient cards, bring in some better replacements. He's got 2 copies of Flusterstorm, a Pithing Needle, a Thoughtseize, a Zealous Persecution, 2 Abrupt Decays, 2 Meddling Mages, a Manriki Gasari, a Garrick Relentless, 2 copies of Containment Priest, a Liliana of the Veil, and a Vendilion Clique. The problem here, of course, is Juan's trying to kill on the first turn. So even though some of these cards are okay in the abstract, in practice, they might be too slow to the party. I think you might see Containment Priest come in as a way to fight Narcomoebas getting flipped over and put into play. I think the 2 copies of Meddling Mage are fine here to name some critical pieces. I think the additional Thoughtseize is okay. The Pithing Needle is okay as I can name the Informer. But again, these are not the most efficient tools.
No, and you're going to see some pretty aggressive sideboarding here from Nicastri. He does have 11 different cards in his sideboard. And as you mentioned, when your opponent's doing something as extreme as what Tian's doing, well, there are a lot of cards in Nicastri's deck that simply don't play out, that don't do anything. He has cards like Lingering Souls in his main deck, which it might as well not be there. It doesn't pitch to Force of Will, and he's never going to cast it. So you likely will see him board in almost any card that costs 1 mana because it at least does something.
And as much as the format has been defined by Treasure Cruise of recent weeks, this is a matchup where Treasure Cruise is also nonsense because the game is going to be determined one way or the other on the first or second turn. Either Aaron is going to be able to blunt Juan's early onslaught of spells, whether that's flipping over his graveyard, whether it's a Charbelcher kill, or Juan's going to kill him. Yeah. And so resolving a Treasure Cruise on turn 3, even if it's for a mana, that's not really a significant player in the matchup. Aaron will have the game determined by then.
Juan's deck more or less asks, do you have it to your opponent?
Yeah.
It forces them, do you have that, well, insert Thoughtseize, Force of Will, and wins if they don't. It gets so much harder game 2 because your opponent knows what you're on. I've actually had games when I've been playing the blue side of this matchup where, I have kept a 0 lander on the play against these style of strategies. If it has 2 Force of Wills in it, it's not unreasonable to keep a hand without lands.
And you're going to see some extreme mulliganing from Aaron now that he knows what's going on. If he knew what he was playing against, he would have sent back that initial 7 in a heartbeat because, as we saw, it provided no defense and Yuan killed him on the first turn. So I think opening hands that don't contain a Thoughtseize or Force of Will wins on the play, and I think even on the draw, he has to strongly consider mulliganing hands that have a Thoughtseize but no Force of Will because he's going to be put to the test so fast.
Yeah, on the play, he's got options. So he'll need to have one of the following cards. He has Spell Pierce, he has Thoughtseize, he has Force of Will, he has Flusterstorm. I suppose on turn 1, Pithing Needle also counts, though it's certainly lower than all the other cards I just mentioned.
Correct.
So we'll see which of those Aaron, he's going to have some combination of those, and he'll ship any hand that doesn't.
Or he should.
Yeah. Pithing Needle is difficult because it's hard to know what to name. You could name Wild Canter to stop that combo. You could name a Spirit Guide if you named the right Spirit Guide. That would be pretty decent. You could name Undercity Informer, but then again, Yuan plays Balustrade Spy and Goblin Charbelcher. So without really a Jataxian Probe or some way to see Juan's hand, Pithing Needle's pretty hard to correctly name.
Exactly. Though, if Juan's gotten away from his graveyard strategy altogether, he's basically keeping in his mana creatures and trying to win with Goblin Charbelcher. A turn 1 Needle on Goblin Charbelcher may lock Juan out of the game entirely.
Yeah.
This is a format of extreme play patterns, and Juan's deck does not give him the wiggle room to have things like Abrupt Decay in his sideboard. He just doesn't generate mana. He can't do that sort of thing.
If Nicastri can be really accurate with that Pithing Needle, if he can throw it at the right spot, he can win the game with it.
Exactly.
He can also completely miss the target. See both players going to 6 here. Kind of different things going on. Nicastri is very aggressively mulliganing, most likely, to try to find specific hate cards, whereas Yuan is probably mulliganing because, when you play a deck which is this extreme with 0 lands, not all your hands have the combo in them, and when they don't, you have to mulligan all of them.
Though these mulligans are not equally punishing, Aaron's deck is a normal Magic deck, so he can mulligan, draw lands and spells, and be fine. Juan's deck is about a critical mass, and once he starts mulliganing, his deck will have a very high failure rate because he'll get these hands that don't go anywhere. He'll have to continue to look for help or keep them and hope that the first couple draw steps yield some help.
Yeah, their deck is certainly counting to a number. You're counting to 4 here. Can I get 4 mana plus a Balustrade Spy / Undercity Informer? If I can, great. If I can't, probably have to ship it. As you go down on cards, that's going to be worse. Nicastri is looking for hate cards. As long as there are hate cards in his hand, I was going to say hate cards plus land. If it's really just hate cards, almost all his hands are equivalent.
Yeah.
It looks like both players decide to go with their 6s. See what hate card Nicastri has decided on. Looks like he does have Ponder in his opener. But he also has a Thoughtseize. So that was one of the cards we talked about here. And now we'll get to see the Charbelcher plan. And where is Yuan at? You see, he has gone to Goblin Charbelcher. So he has a Charbelcher, Rite of Flame, Simian Spirit Guide, Jataxian Probe, Summoner's Pact, Cabal Therapy. That's a ways away from the combo right now.
Especially if Aaron decides to just strip the Goblin Charbelcher, because all this hand becomes is mana. And no way to kill.
Not even really mana.
And not even really that much mana.
Yeah, so when you get to Goblin Charbelcher, you have to count up to 7. If you can get 4 to play the Charbelcher, 3 to activate, or if you get the 3 and the 4 for Charbelcher, then you get to win. You activate it, yeah, 4 to play, 3 to activate. Right now, Yuan is pretty far off that amount of mana. Remember that the Summoner's Pact is actually just an Elvish Spirit Guide in this deck. It can find green creatures, so he uses it on his combo turn to get another mana. So he more or less has 3 mana plus Charbelcher in his hand, plus a redraw with Jataxian Probe.
Though, keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to have 7 mana in the same turn. Sometimes these decks will put a Charbelcher into play and hope to draw 3 mana before the opponent can kill them or remove the Charbelcher from play.
Yeah, Nicastri actually is going to go ahead and take Summoner's Pact here, it looks like. It wasn't the choice I expected. It is one of the mana sources, so it's probably just as good as any of the others.
Sure.
And we're going to go back over to Yuan. His draw for the turn was Land Grant.
So Land Grant is part of the sideboard package here, and it's a card from Mercadian Masks. It's a bit of an oddball. Very good in this deck because, again, no land, so you'll always be able to fill the alternate cost. And you get to go through your deck and get a forest card. Normally a Taiga in these builds, though the ones with the more budget stomping ground. And this is good for a couple of reasons. One, it means the Land Grant is just mana. You get to go ahead and get a land. And second, it means his deck now has no lands in it again, which means if he's able to activate the Goblin Charbelcher, it's a kill. There is a risk with these decks sometimes where you activate Charbelcher, the top card of your deck happens to be the Stomping Ground, and now you have to go get 3 mana again and try somewhere down the line.
Right.
Now with back to no lands in deck, if he's able to activate the Charbelcher, it's a kill.
So he does play 1 land in his deck after sideboard, and that's what the Land Grant is for. So either, when you have Land Grant, either you already have the land in your hand, and if you don't, you get it in your hand. So he plays 2 copies of Land Grant, not wanting to draw a second one of those ever. Both of them are part of his sideboard package. And now we will take a look at what Nicastri is sitting on.
And this is a good sequence of spells so far from Yuan. He wants to get the land out of his deck first and then draw a card because he doesn't want to risk drawing the Stomping Ground off of his cantrip and then not having anything to find.
Yeah. Decent hand from Nicastri here. He has a second land. It's a fetch land. Brainstorm and Ponder to help him set up, to help him play off from this point, and then a Swords to Plowshares, which is not great, but maybe has some play.
He doesn't know for sure that it's dead, even though it seems likely.
Seems likely, so but because of the power of Brainstorm, he can just shuffle it away. Should be fine. And Yuan opting not to drop the Stomping Ground, doesn't want to get it wastelanded.
Decks with Deathrite Shaman often play with Wasteland because you want to be able to leverage your mana advantage. So,
yep,
not unreasonable for him to play around it here. Although, Aaron playing 0 copies of Wasteland in his deck.
Yeah, traditionally a Stoneblade deck will play a couple copies. Deathblade, because they need that green mana, is a little less likely to play a card like Wasteland. And that's been something that Legacy has moved toward recently. A lot of players have gotten away from Wasteland.
Part of it is the prevalence of Blue-Red Delver, which is a deck that can't really afford to play Wasteland because almost the entire deck is spells that cost a single blue or a single red. So Wasteland's providing no mana.
It's just a spell. See a Ponder here from Nicastri. And he has dodged the early assault. You got a Thoughtseize off. I don't think it was a great Thoughtseize. A lot of times, there's some hands that you can just destroy with a Thoughtseize. Nicastri didn't really do that. He got a mana, which was good. I mean, certainly is worth the card, but he has to expect that Tian can come back from that one relatively quickly.
Well, if Aaron's able to supplement it with other disruption, you see he's pondering right now. He's looking at Meddling Mage. I don't know if he's going to elect to keep this card or shuffle it away with this Polluted Delta, but if he goes ahead and plants a Meddling Mage on the Goblin Charbelcher, that might just be a hammerlock in this game.
Now, the Wild Canter was the draw for Yuan. Has to decide whether or not to pull the trigger on that Stomping Ground. If he can Stomping Ground into Wild Canter, he's going to get close to enough mana for Charbelcher.
The problem is he knows about the Swords to Plowshares.
Right. He's going to shock to 16, play Wild Canter. And at least this will put a pinch on Nicastri, right? He can't Swords and play, he doesn't know if he wants the Swords and play the Meddling Mage, for example.
It just depends how he ordered with the Ponder here. If he has the opportunity to draw the Meddling Mage, play a third land, and Plow and Meddling Mage in the same turn, that's a really good lineup. He's loath, I think, to sacrifice this fetch land, though, because the top of his deck was so solid.
Top of his deck's Meddling Mage. He has a Brainstorm in hand. There's a lot of reasons to not crack the fetch land right now.
And Legacy is a format of intricate interactions, small pieces of value, order of operations matters a lot. These are complicated turns, even though the game's, in many respects, just barely gotten underway.
into fetch here. He's gonna, looks like he has decided to go for the end of turn Swords to Plowshares. This does deny him a really excellent Brainstorm. It denies that Meddling Mage that was on top, but Aaron putting a high priority on keeping Tian off mana sources makes the sacrifice here so that he can play that Swords.
And because Yuan's deck is by no means a normal deck, he can afford to give up these inefficiencies by keeping his board contained, because Yuan's going to draw a lot of dead cards over the course of the game.
Of note there, Yuan did sacrifice the Wild Canter for mana in response to the Swords to Plowshares. That's why it went to the graveyard instead of being exiled.
And this is the marquee removal spell of Legacy. They don't make them like this anymore.
No, not. All right, another Thoughtseize here from Nicastri. And he gets to take another shot at Tian's hand. He sees it as it was before, still those 2 red rituals, Rite of Flame and Simian Spirit Guide, the Cabal Therapy and the Goblin Charbelcher. The addition was a Pact of Negation on Tian's side.
So this is the interesting sort of map that Aaron gets to draw out for this game. He can do the easy thing, which is go after the Charbelcher, which he's electing to do. He also could choose to do the hard thing, which is go after things like Simian Spirit Guide, try to just dead the Charbelcher in hand, and make sure Yuan never gets enough mana to do anything of note. Aaron taking the safer route here, which is just get the Charbelcher out of the hand. It's the one thing in Yuan's hand that could lead to a kill, but there is arguments to kind of go a different direction.
If Nicastri was able to keep that Meddling Mage, which he had to shuffle away, I bet we would have seen him go after the mana sources.
Yeah.
You see Dark Ritual to draw there for Tian.
Dark Ritual challenging for this deck to cast. It can really only do it through a Metamorphose.
There are a lot of awkwardnesses and oddities to this kind of deck.
Yeah, and you're seeing this now on display as Aaron has drawn, you know, a Thoughtseize or 2.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing some of the...
It doesn't always win on turn 1. Sometimes it just sits around and draws some cards and really doesn't do anything.
Yeah. So Yuan's hand right now lacking both mana, although he's just picked up another Rite of Flame. Both mana and a thing to do with mana.
Yeah, a second copy of Rite of Flame, though, really huge. That card works well with itself in particular. Right now, he could go up to 5 red mana this turn if he needed to.
Though because Aaron has Deathrite Shaman in hand, that's going to get a little more complicated if Aaron sits on the Deathrite Shaman.
Right. It would mean that Tian only has 4 red mana instead of 5.
Yeah.
And you see Nicastri not really able to put too much of a clock on Tian. His clock right now is just 2 a turn. Manamorphose looks like it was the draw for Tian, so now actually has the ability to cast some spells, at least one of them. It turns on the Dark Ritual in his hand, which I think is the most important part. So now he actually has a lot of mana. He can ritual from 2 to 3 to 4 to 6.
And he has a Pact of Negation in hand. The problem is he still has nothing to do. That's the last piece of the puzzle that Yuan's missing.
Yeah.
I think if he gets to a point where, you know, he has a Charbelcher or something to mill over, you'll see him make a move. But for the time being, he has no payoff, so he has to wait.
Yeah, he's close.
Yeah. Mana-wise, he's good to go. The concern now is, can you find something to do with all that mana in time?
Yeah, because the longer he waits here, Nicastri is going to start assembling this wall of cards like Spell Pierce, Flusterstorm, Force of Will. And when a deck like Deathblade gets to play things like Brainstorm, they're going to find that counterspell wall quicker than you'd think.
On top of other disruption like Thoughtseize and potential Duresses and Inquisitions as well, Yuan's deck does not really allow it to fight through that kind of stuff. He's already gotten hit by 2 Thoughtseizes. The fact that he's still in a position to potentially win this game with the right draw steps is impressive enough.
Remember, unlike Nicastri, who's brainstorming into cards here and shuffling away lands, Tian is just drawing a card every turn and hoping that it's what he needs. Nicastri, you see here, playing just on Tian's end step. Looks like he has found 1 piece of permission, I believe a Flusterstorm added in.
Flusterstorm great against Yuan's deck when he's trying to go off through Rite of Flame. Oddly enough, not good 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yuan can get hands of just creatures that generate mana, Charbelcher, and Lion's Eye Diamond, and Flusterstorm can do nothing.
Actually, I'm going to pause here. It's not actually a Flusterstorm, it's an alternate art card. This is the one Vendilion Clique in his sideboard.
That, on the other hand, is always going to be good once he has enough mana to work with.
Yeah, and that's actually going to be That seems pretty good here. Not only does it take away a card from Tian's hand, but it really ups Nicastri's clock, which is something he could use.
Yeah. Doesn't want to wait too long here. Close this game out before Yuan's able to draw a hand that can reassemble and go.
So the Deathrite Shaman will attack this turn. That puts Tian down to 13. He may want to, he probably suspects a Vendilion Clique here. That attack would certainly indicate one. Nicastri, during Tian's draw step, is going to go ahead and it looks like play the Vendilion Clique, fetching down to 14. It does take his shields down, but he'll get to take a card.
Vendilion Clique, one of the more awkward cards, familiar with Modern and Legacy, of stopping players inside of their draw step.
Now,
not a place where players get stopped very often.
I want to ask here, he's doing it during Tian's draw step, which certainly is one time to use Vendilion Clique. How do you feel about sometimes saving a Vendilion Clique either for Tian's end step or waiting, like when a player who's ritualing is like, let Tian burn a couple rituals and then Vendilion Clique him? You know, maybe take, in response to that second ritual, take the Charbelcher away.
I think there is some merit to maybe waiting, but you also have to factor in Aaron may not be 100% positive what he's playing against. And does he find redundancy in the kill where I stop to click him as he's going off and he has redundant ways to do what he's trying to do?
Yeah. I guess another point is, we see here, Tian does have 2 copies of Pact of Negation, so he may not want to wait to do anything during that combo turn.
Yeah.
We see 2 Pact, 2 Pact, 3 red rituals, a black ritual, a Manamorphose, and a Cabal Therapy. So mana-wise, Tian can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could go to 7 if Nicastri doesn't hold up a mana to use Deathrite Shaman. So he has enough mana and 2 blue Pacts. It's a good hand.
Yeah.
It's just missing that Charbelcher.
Which is the risk here of even sending one of the rituals to the bottom and giving Yuan another look at it, because he's already in a position where he needs help. His hand is currently assembled, doesn't do anything.
It looks like Nicastri's going to leave Yuan with all the cards.
Which is a risk, but keep in mind, you know, the thing he's most worried about right now is Yuan finding a Charbelcher, because Yuan's deck has a ton of mana, there's a ton of rituals, a ton of creatures, but not that many ways to actually go about winning the game.
And Tian has some options here. He can either discard the Cabal Therapy, or he can try to storm off to a mini storm here, which is what I think he's going to do. He's going to go ahead and Red Flame into Manamorphose and think, hey, if I draw that Charbelcher off this Manamorphose, I win.
And time is not on his side, which is what I like about this play a lot. He identifies he's in some trouble.
Yeah, that's 4 power, possibly even 5 on the caster side. Yuan doesn't have too many more draws. May as well just take 1 here while the shields are down.
And his Rite of Flame has gotten so much worse because the next turn, Aaron's going to be able to leave up his Deathrite Shaman and eat the Rite of Flame to generate 1 less mana. So I think rolling the dice this turn makes some sense.
The Manamorphose made double black there. The first of those 2 black mana is being used for Cabal Therapy. He sees shields are down, coast is clear. Now here's the question, did Tian find anything?
Yeah. And the way that Aaron has sideboarded here, Yuan's graveyard is actually good to go.
Yeah, and no, he did not find anything. His draw,
I believe, was another Cabal Therapy.
Yeah, looks like it was another black card. It was not the Charbelcher he was looking for. Yeah, tried to Thoughtseize away Force of Wills. That made sense. And now we get to go back to Nicastri. He's going to get to untap here. And Meddling Mage was the draw for Nicastri. That will help cut off some of these outs and actually will increase Nicastri's clock by another turn.
That might be the lock. I don't know if Yuan can get through all this in time now, assuming Aaron names anything reasonable with the Meddling Mage.
Yeah. He could name some of the ritual. He could name the Spirit Guide as well. He probably, no, it just can't be played. It's not a Pithing Needle. You're right. He has to name something like Charbelcher.
And Aaron may be asking for confirmation on the same thing.
Right, it's the card can't be played, slightly different. So that means, yes, you could still pitch a Simian Spirit Guide through this card because it's not playing it, it's activating it.
Right.
However, it can name cards like Charbelcher and Undercity Informer. And he went with Undercity Informer here and plays a land, attacks for 3. Tian is down to 10, and that is just enough damage, actually, to make this, this is now lethal next turn because of that second Deathrite that Nicastri played.
And a Death Ray activation knocks him down to 8. 5 points power in play. 2 more Death Ray Shaman activations. That's -1.
He beforehand was 1 short without the death rate, but now he has 1 extra.
And Juan's saying if there's anything to be done, but I believe he is dead-ended. I mean, he may just he may cast a Simian Spirit Guide to have a blocker, but that just means he's dead the following turn.
Yep, and he knows it. So we're going on to game 3. We saw here, these all spells decks certainly get worse on the draw, especially get worse once your opponent knows what you're doing.
Yep.
And here will be the challenge. Nicastri on the draw. So we talked before about how he had to mulligan to cards like Thought Seize, Spell Pierce, Fluster Storm, Force of Will. I mean, you can't, when you're playing a deck with 3 Force of Wills, you can't just mulligan to Force of Will. You might end up mulliganing all the way to 0 if you do that.
Aaron, if the hand has a Thought Seize and something else going on, I think he can afford to keep without Force of Will, but if Juan keeps 7, you just can't mess around. The hand's got to have huge upside.
How much of this do you base on body language? If you're playing against an opponent like Yuan, and Juan immediately, say, looks at his 7, looks at it for 5 seconds, just says, keep, real solidly. Are you just mulliganing to Force of Will now?
I'm way more likely to. I think he...
I
think he should.
It's like the writing on the wall. You're like, oh gosh, he has one, doesn't he?
Yeah. And it looks like Juan might be siding out the Charbelcher package right now, which would not surprise me because based on what he saw out of Aaron's deck, it looks like his graveyard might be fine. And it's easier for him to win out of the graveyard than it is for him to win with Charbelcher, because Charbelcher requires 7 mana and any of his creatures only require 4. The base is a lot lower for what he needs to go off.
If he had a Balustrade Spy instead of a Charbelcher that game, well, I guess it's hard to say whether he would have won because the Rite of Flames are also out of the sideboard.
Yeah. No, it's...
But going to 4 is much easier than 7.
I believe that the instinct to get away from your graveyard, game 2, makes a lot of sense. Because a lot of people in this tournament are going to have Tormod's Crypts, Rest in Pieces, surgical extractions, whatever. These cards that Juan doesn't really want to play against. But that game went on for a really long time. Aaron never went after the graveyard. Put a Meddling Mage on a graveyard piece instead of Goblin Charbelcher, even if he didn't see a graveyard piece, and he did see Goblin Charbelcher. If I'm in Juan's seat right now, the evidence points to your graveyard's good to go, and you should be leaning on that rather than Goblin Charbelcher for game 3.
And as far as sideboarding goes, Juan only has 2 options. You can play the All Spells deck or the Belcher deck, but that's all his sideboard does.
Yeah.
We've seen people playing Charbelcher top 8 events without a sideboard before, simply because there's very little you can change.
Yeah, we see the one of ATOG package often. We see an LOL written across the deck registration sheet. We see it all.
I think my favorite one I've seen is I saw someone register one of the entire crew of the Weatherlight.
That's a nice.
That was a good one.
Good sideboard package there.
I don't think you could board any of them in. They're all kind of gold cards costing between 3 and 5.
People have played a card. You could card some people.
The Silver Golem, not the Planeswalker.
Right.
Okay. You could activate Lotus Petals and hit them with it?
Exactly.
That doesn't really do much.
You could generate a bunch of rituals and cast a Tangarth, and then if you generate more rituals down the line, you can start killing things.
Fighting things. Yeah, you have a 4/4 for 5. He's pretty good.
Good deal.
I don't think you can bounce Stark, so I don't really. You could kill a very problematic hate card with him.
Yep. What does Hannah Shit's Navigator do? Does it get an artifact?
She regrowth. She brings back artifacts.
Perfect.
Oh wow! You're right. Okay, great.
I think you may have undersold the crew of the Weatherlight. I think they have more utility there than perhaps you initially gave credit.
If your opponent's playing green, you could make Miri Cat Warrior and Forest Walk on them.
Forest Walk is good there.
It's great.
Probably don't have creature removal against you post board.
All right. Well, we'll see. Does Tian have it? He's keeping 7 on the play, and so is Nicastri keeping 7 on the draw. It looks like he has. Well, the question is, does he have a Force of Will? We'll see soon enough.
Yeah. Juan's pulling a Taxian Probe forward, so we'll see.
Is Nicastri going to get turn 1s twice? it's really scary being on the draw against this deck.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if anybody in the room is a favorite on the draw in this matchup. There's no Force of Will. It's double spell pierce.
A solid hand, but...
And I think you have to keep this if you're Nicastri, and you just take your lumps and say, I'm losing to a turn 1 combo kill if you have it. And maybe he doesn't have a turn 1 combo, but I do, at the very least, Tian can make a turn 1 Chromox and Cabal Therapy away Spell Pierce, which is pretty good.
Well, I think the other route he was contemplating with this hand was maybe trying to cast the Wild Cantor with the intent of going off on turn 2. But because Aaron has a source of Plowshares in hand, that doesn't work either.
And if he wants to cast Cabal Therapy, he's going to have to exile this Simian Spirit Guide. I mean, sorry, not Simian Spirit, the Undercity Informer, which is his combo piece.
I don't think he's going to do that. I think that he can wait one more turn, because if all Aaron does is have a Spell Pierce at the ready, Juan's just picked up Pact of Negation, so we can play over the top of that, give himself another draw step. If he picks up some mana, he might be good to go.
So he can delay this decision for a turn to draw something like a Lotus Petal.
Exactly.
Well played here. You know, there's that temptation when you see all that counter match, you'd be like, oh, I need to do something before he has a spell up. He's going to get me if I give him that spell, but not so. And Lotus Petal may have made the difference. He now does have 3 mana here. He has the... It's not 4. Oh, he is still short, isn't he? Because he can make the Informer, but he can't activate it.
He knows also that, yeah, exactly. And he needs to be able to do everything in one turn because of the Swords to Plowshares. He can't pass and hope.
All right, Tian's going to go for Lotus Petal. Can this draw out of Spell Pierce? I think it might. And if so, Tian might be fine with this. Sure, if you want to trade Lotus Petal for Spell Pierce, Tian can just try again next turn. Or he can Pact of Negation here. Now, curiosity. If Aaron had not played the Spell Pierce here, well, no, it wouldn't matter. I was going to ask if we would have seen the Therapy, but the Therapy would have been pierced then.
Yeah, I think that Juan would have, if that Petal resolved, I think Juan would have just said go. Because at some point in the turn, Aaron's going to use the Spell Pierce. If it's not there, it's going to be somewhere else.
Huge draw for Nicastri.
Huge draw.
Here's one of his 3 copies of Force of Will. That is the gold standard in this matchup.
Now, what I'm interested to see is Aaron want to put the shields down, get the Stoneforge missing into place so he can get a clock. He'll only has Force of Will as protection. It looks like he's going to sit back on both of his counter spells.
Yeah, he's going to want to cast that Storm for Mystic on 3 mana for sure. But the addition of Force of Will in Nicastri's hand really can't be overstated. It makes him a pretty big favorite in this game.
Yeah.
So now with both Spell Pierce and Force of Will, Nicastri is safe from Pact of Negation. And in fact, could win off it. Yuan might start a counter war and play that Pact and then get his second spell pierced and die.
Yeah.
To not being able to pay for his own Pact. When you're playing a deck like All Spells, you can't afford to play around really good top decks sometimes.
You have a very short window to do anything.
Right.
The long game doesn't favor you because eventually Aaron's going to find his Thoughtseizes or his Force of Wills or whatever you're worried about. So when you have the information that coast is clear, you should err on the side of pulling the trigger.
Chromox is going to resolve. Nicastri had a Spell Pierce at the ready, but did not fire it. And he could cast Therapy or exile Therapy. Decisions here from Tian.
And Tian might just be going for it this turn, thinking that he's only playing against Spell Pierce.
I mean, I would.
Yep.
My opponent, if you are going to live scared of Force of Will, you just shouldn't play this deck.
Exactly.
Dark Ritual's the play. That's going to get Spell Pierced. And here's what I was saying before, where you might see Tian just kill himself. Yep, Pact of Negation on the Spell Pierce, and Nicastri is going to have to show off. He's going to let the Pact, he should let the Pact resolve.
Yeah.
And once he flashes that Force of Will on the Dark Ritual, that should be game.
When I first got back into Magic, there was a guy at my store I respected a lot. He was playing a bargain deck in our extended tournament. Won on turn 1, just put a bargain to play, cast it 1. And I said, aren't you worried about Force of Will? And he says, when you play like decks like this, it's best not to think about those things.
And there you have it. 2-1, Aaron Nicastri with Deathblade. He's going to be the winner of your match here. Losing game 1, once he knew what his opponent was playing though, was able to win both the post-board games.
And, you know, it's a pretty typical story for both of these decks. Game 1, I think Yuan's a huge favorite against most decks in the room because they had to have Force of Will in their opening hand. Not every deck even has Force of Will to begin with, and even the ones that do won't always have it. Aaron's deck, I think, is behind in a lot of Game 1s because he doesn't have always the most efficient tools. He's not that precise Game 1. But post-board, Yuan's doing a lot of the same thing or hoping that Charbelcher catches his opponent off guard. And on Aaron's side, he gets to cut out a lot of the cards that don't really do anything, replace them with the Thoughtseizes and the Meddling Mages and the other counter spells that we saw do a lot of work there post-board.
Yeah, let's give credit where it's due, too. I really liked how Yuan played that Game 3 there. He had a lot of times where he could almost combo